tēnā rā tātou, ko hui mai nei tēnei rā, anau mai hara mai ki tēnei hui, o te Komiti Maori, ka tima te tātou hui me te karakia mio mai tātou. Ka tuhi au ki te tuhi anu, ka tuhi au ki te tuhi anu, ka atuhi hōko nā pūna weu, nā pūkina, nā wānanga, nā tauira, ko tēnei te kimi noa, te rapu noa ki te take, i ākuru mai no ngā rangitu haha, uhi, wero, ara mai te mahi, au me hui e, tāi, kore tātou.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ka nui te mihi ki a koutou, i no nei i te tepu, e a rātou i te Zoom, no reira tēnā koutou. Welcome to our Komiti Maori meeting this morning. Just a reminder to councillors that the public section of this meeting is being recorded and live streamed. The webcast will be archived and made publicly available on the council's website within 2 days after each meeting for a period of 3 years. Our purpose is to provide greater access to council debate, decision making and encouraging openness and transparency. However, council accepts no liability for any individual opinions or statements. This is in accordance with council's live streaming and recording of meetings protocols, which can be viewed on council's website. I also remind all that local government decision making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. Councillors, please ensure your videos are turned on, and if you wish to speak, raise your electronic hand and turn on your microphone. To start our formalities, I'm going to call for apologies, which we haven't had. No apologies. Public forum, none are advised. Items not on the agenda, none advised. Order of business as per our agenda. And just quickly calling for declaration of conflicts of interest on any of the members. All right, thank you. Now moving to our minutes, our previous minutes, which are on page,
Page 8.
They start on page 8 of your agenda. I'm going to move those minutes and call for a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Easy. All those in favour, say aye. Raise your right hand on the screen. Those around the table. Those against. Carried. Matters arising. Are there any matters arising from those minutes, councillors? Thank you. Now we're going to move straight to our presentations because I do know our presenters are with us. Just checking, do we have James with us? We do have James with us.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, James. Tēnā koe, James. Nau mai hara mai ki te hui o te Komiti Māori. It's nice to have you here today. We're looking forward to the presentation and I'm not going to hold you up. I'm just going to pass the rake to you and let you start your presentation. Kia ora. Kia koe.
Ka pai. Ka pai. Tēnā no tātou. Tēnā koe te rangatira nā hau te kaikarakia mā tātou I tēnei rā. Ai, e te kai whakahaere o te hui nei, tēnā koe te rangatira, koutou nā mema Maori runa I te Komiti, tēnā no hoki koutou, nā kaunihira katoa tēnei te mihi atu ki rō whare nei. Kia ora everyone. James Hudson, nōku te hōnere, ki te hara mai ki te kōrero atu ki au koutou I tēnei ata. Just a little bit about me. Born and raised here in Whakatane, currently based here in Ohope, around a year ago. On my father's side, my tribes are Katohea and Tūhoi. On my mother's side, mai iwi Ngāti Awa, Ngāti Pūkeko, me Ngāi Tai. Ka pai. Very grateful for the invite to come and have a kōrero today. I understand I have 40 minutes. Hopefully the majority of that time will be spent with interactive kōrero. Ka pai. Just a little bit, just by way of context. So my professional background, as I said, raised here in Whakatane. Professional background, my 20s saw me practicing law, environmental law. My 30s saw me did my doctorate in organisational psychology under Professor Mason Jury. And my 40s seems to be around data and measurement at both central and local government levels. For about the past few years, I've spent in Tāmaki Makaurau, supporting the Tāmaki Makaurau Mana Whenua Forum with their work with the Auckland Council. And it was a real honour to work with, that collective of 19 iwi and to support their engagement with not only their own iwi but also council. My kōrero today is based on my recent experience in working with the Ministry for their Environment to produce their recent synthesis report, Environment Aotearoa 2022. Their last report was produced, the last synthesis report that is produced in 2019. Look, in summary, this was like one of the coolest pieces of work that I have done in my entire career. And I've done some pretty cool pieces of work. So it is I'm really grateful to be able to share this. Just some context though, at perhaps the national level that may support where this work came from. Is this moving? Oh, okay. Are you guys seeing Maori leading pattern measurement? You seen that slide?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh. So look, just to, the key takeaway from the Environment Aotearoa 22 report would be, number one, working with Maori to produce the report in a manner more closely than the ministry has done in the past. Number two, informed by Te Tiriti. And number three, the connection with wellbeing. And if we step back a bit, we can see that this is a bit of, this is quite characteristic of the direction that, at least in the measurement space, Aotearoa seems to be going. If we look at the work of the Iwi Chairs Forum, for example, with Statistics New Zealand, they've been working together for the last couple of years now to look at how we govern and manage our data across the entire central government system, and how may a Te Tiriti-based approach look to that. We also have the work of Ngā Pukenga, the Maori leadership group that is working with the Treasury to design How to Waiora, a Maori wellbeing framework that sits alongside and has equal relevance, at least according to Minister Grant Robertson. So this framework sits alongside the Living Standards framework and is currently influencing how central government policy and strategy has been designed. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, at a more local government level, there is the work of Auckland Council with the Tāmaki Makaurau Mana Whenua Forum and their recent Māori Upland performance measurement framework, whereby Auckland Council, all its divisions, including its CCOs, now have, Māori KPIs by which they need to show progress against Māori outcomes in their specific regions. So the reason for showing this, for touching on this context, is to show that this is an emergent piece here in Aotearoa. What all of at least these three of many pieces shows, the common factor of each of these is that they are either central or local government, either partnering with, or in the very least, working closely with Māori and collectives. And I think, at least one key message, I'd invite all of you to take from this kōrero today would be this. Kapai. So, in terms of my kōrero today, there's at least three things I'd like to touch on. Number one, what was the challenge that MFE was looking to address with this particular report? Number two, what were the innovations that we designed to meet those challenges? And number three, what were the insights that we gained? What did we learn? What worked and what could have been improved on? So looking first to, what was the challenge that we needed to be met? I mean, firstly, at quite a high level, Aotearoa, or the world, we're definitely in a state of transformation within the COVID era, and at least in our country, that is bringing a more heightened awareness of well-being, not only well-being for human, but the impact on the environment. And that's also reflected in at least the current government. Actually, could I invite participants to mute their microphone? I'm getting quite a bit of feedback, which could potentially be distracting for participants on this week today. So anyway, number one, heightened awareness of well-being, particularly due to COVID. Number two, at least here within Aotearoa, we do have the resource management reforms, and included in those reforms are the proposed amendments to the Environmental Reporting Act, which I suspect, will bring it'll be interesting to see, the provisions in relation to both Te Tiriti and Mātauranga Māori in this emerging legislation. Some of the challenges that we also sought to address were those specifically recommended by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment in his 2019 report. And in that report, he made at least 4 recommendations in terms of our reporting going forward. These are them here. To move beyond simply reporting on state and what may be driving the state of our current environment and what is our outlooks for the future. In terms of expanding the context within which we report on indicators, that's expanding in at least a couple of ways. Number one, balancing the use of both quantitative, which is traditionally relied on, with qualitative data. And in terms of interpreting, and analysing insights from the current indicators that we use, moving solely beyond Western scientific to include social data, to include economic data, in addition to Mātauranga Māori. And And it's really contextualising at a more regional and local level, what some of these indicators are telling us. And then finally, again, the use of mātauranga Māori within our science system, has received a lot of attention in at least the last couple of years. And the Parliamentary Commissioner's recommendation was to explore how can we work more closely with Māori, our Te Tiriti partner, in terms of our reporting system, and as part of that, how may we weave in more meaningfully mātauranga Māori. So it was within this context and these challenges that we worked with the Ministry to explore what may a useful and appropriate approach be for the upcoming 2022 report. Okay, so we started this at about, might have been about mid last year, around April, maybe even earlier, April, May, yeah. And where we landed was looking at least three things: our kaupapa, our process, and our content in terms of the report. So looking first at the kaupapa, so, all the frame. So we definitely reviewed existing international and national frameworks that may be appropriate, to frame both our current indicator sets, working very closely with Statistics New Zealand, of course, and also how we can present the analysis and the insights of those indicators. So at an international level, for example, we reviewed the Sustainable Development Goals. At the national level, Living Standards Framework itself, other frameworks, more public sector frameworks, I would say, including Statistics New Zealand indicators Aotearoa, their framework. It was actually the work from Professor Mason Jury, and he has done some work on Matariki as a wellbeing framework itself, although that is much broader to pretty much encompass everything. But in looking at Matariki as a potential frame, we saw some clear alignment with the environmental sector, and going through our analytical process, we eventually landed on Matariki as a frame. I should also add that during this analysis, we did bring on the expertise of Dr. Rangi Mātāmua to support, how appropriate and how useful Matariki may be for this purpose. And there are at least three reasons why we thought Matariki would be useful. First, again, a departure in the Environment Aotearoa 2022 report is that it isn't solely focused on the environment. Rather, it is also more expansive to include not only environmental well-being, and human well-being. So this is a very clear recognition that humans are a part of the environment, and we should should be viewed as such and reported on as such. Number two, the Matariki, Te Kāhui o Matariki, the Matariki cluster, is essentially it's a whakapapa system, if you ask me, but it is very integrative, and there are a lot of connections. And so taking the more ecosystem approach that the Parliamentary Commissioner suggested as well, Matariki, as a potential framework, met that objective. And then in terms of integrating mātauranga Māori and working more closely with Māori to report on our environment, well, you've got a frame that is mātauranga Māori in and of itself, and so that goes a long way towards that. So so that's some of the rationale for why we landed with the matariki as a frame. Looking at our process, again, the theme of partnership and working meaningfully together, was definitely a priority. This whole process actually, I should also say this whole process was run, in this COVID era entirely online. So we had, I was based here at Ohope the whole time, but we had kaimahi right from up north, from Tāmaki, Pōneke, Whanganui. We had, rangi mātāmua zooming in from the Urureta there, and right down to the South Island. But the entire process started with a one-day wānanga, where it was really clear, if we were doing this, if we were running this on a marae, we would have everybody in the whare at the same time having the kōrero. Whether you're a rangatira or big, right down to rangatahi, whether you're a kaimahi, what have you. And that's what we did with this piece here. And a few, some really important insights came out of that wānanga. Number one, that it was important to, have insight from both within the ministry and Stats NZ and also externally. And so in that respect, we had Alison Collins, who's Chief Science Advisor for the ministry, working really closely with Rangi Mātāmua. That was a really nice relationship, I felt, in terms of really setting the kaupapa, but to bring in, in addition to Natasha Lewis, Melanie Mark Shadbolt, and Rachel Milicic, DCEs from MFE and SNZ respectively. It was a real honour to work with, Māori environmental experts such as Sean Awatere, Dan Hikurua, and Warbrick. Oh well, must be nerves. I'm sure our mate from his first name's just slipped me for the time being. Oh, I hope he doesn't see this recording. I'll get in trouble. Anyway, Warbrick. Okay, let it go, James. Haere tonu. Anyway, so it's good to bring an external pukinga to work with government leadership. And then we had Carla Gomez, Isaac Warbrick, kapai. Still got to get in trouble for that one. And then Ministry Science Lead, Carla Gomez, and then they brought me in as the Mātauranga lead. And so Carla and I worked really closely together in terms of designing the process and pulling it together. And then we had, and it was when I say really cool piece of work, it was just so cool to work with. We had some really cool Mātauranga Māori researchers, including Davina Thompson, I would say, based here in Marata. And then we had, some of the ministries leading, principal advisors from the, water and, and I should also include some of Statistics New Zealand's principal advisors. And so bringing this mix together and working in this way was a good thing. And I would say the other innovative measure we took was we actually developed, as we'll see later, each chapter of Environment Aotearoa 2022 was based on one of the whetū. So with Waiti, for example, we looked at, the state of our freshwater, and with, Waita, marine conditions. But for each of those whetū, we essentially had a process whereby, we would do some of the scoping and the groundwork for each, as the leads and the researchers, we would pull together the original scoping for what that chapter may look like, what may our key message include, what is the most important data to present. And we essentially ran a wānanga process, for each of the 9 chapters. And so within each wānanga, it would start with the team, and wānanga, we would have a full day for each chapter where we would bring everybody in, and that day would be structured in the first instance, once our team had done some work over the week or so to pull together a draft outline of the chapter. And then we would start our wānanga, then we would bring in external science advisors and mātauranga advisors to work, to wānanga and have their contribution. Then later on in the day, we would pull in our external pukinga, our experts, and they would come in and they would critique. And so we would actually mould the chapter as we went. And then later on during the day, we would have, after it's gone through that process, we would have Rangi and Alison and Tash and whomever come in as well. And it was just really good to ensure that everyone involved at all levels were really involved in the shaping of that report, as opposed, for example, to putting a lot of work over all of these months, and then submitting a draft. Then the draft goes up through the various processes and then potentially making changes. So everybody at all levels were involved right from day one in shaping and determining, what was important for this report. So that was quite a cool process. So, a matariki kaupapa to frame our report, a te tiriti-based, or at least partnership, working together process by which we built the report. It was also really important that we integrated mātauranga Māori within the report itself. So as I mentioned earlier, the report itself has 9 chapters. It opens with, 9 main chapters, but then, it starts with the message from the CEs and, the more preliminary type, sections at the start of the report. But, the report itself opens with the chapter on matariki, matariki representing well-being, and then moves into pohutakawa. So pohutakawa as the whetū, where we honour those that have passed. For the purposes of this report, this chapter looked at, the state of our declining species, and those that have either gone or are particularly at risk. And then in the upcoming 6 chapters, for example, tupua nuku, tupua rani, more land-based, Waiti, Waita, freshwater and marine, Waipuna rani and ururani in terms of, atmospheric condition. Each of these main chapters, if you haven't already seen the report, you'll see that each chapter has a structure. So it's really important for us that each chapter started off with, we're very grateful to have Rini Mātāmua provide us with karakia specific to each whetū. So he provided karakia bespoke to this report. The first third of the chapter, of each of these chapters, is basically mātauranga Māori that looks at the whakapapa of that whetū to us, and then some kōrero tuku iho, also mātauranga Māori that, elaborate further on the report. The second section of each chapter looks at what is our connection as people to this domain. So how does seawater and our connection with the marine how does our connection with the marine environment, either contribute to our well-being, and why is it important to us? And then in the final section of each chapter, that's when we get to the more more quantitative, I suppose, indicators and data, and what are some of the findings from that. Whereas if you were to look at previous reports, not only synthesis reports, but even just each of the domain reports that to date the Ministry has released, I suspect that you'll find that the chapters are more so around here, the more quantitative and to some extent qualitative data. So, this does signal a real departure, and a real new way of reporting for the Ministry. And just in terms of content, one other thing that I would say is, in terms of mātauranga Māori, it wasn't as though all of that was, just in the first section, and then we move on to everything else here. Mātauranga Māori was, included in, speaking to our connection with each domain. And to the extent possible, we tried to use Mātauranga Māori here, in terms of Māori specific indicators and data, either iwi, or Māori environmental organisations that they had collected for themselves. But, as we'll talk to later, one of our findings is, there just isn't as much, Māori specific data and/or indicators I've heard, available at this stage anyway to report. So that's how we saw, that's how we attempted to integrate Mātauranga Māori throughout the report itself. Ka pai. So that was our process. And again, I say that it was one of the coolest pieces that I've ever worked on, because it was really good to really experience what happens when we come together and work together. Like, I'm pretty sure she wouldn't mind, because we were both quite open about it, but even myself and the science lead, I think it'd be fair to say we clashed. We clashed at the beginning of this process, because it was really good to, you take Māori thinking, which is inherently whakapapa based and wairua infused, and then you move that together with, these scientists. We had some good kōreros at the beginning of this process. Like even little things, like, because when you've got, because with the matariki, with the matariki whakapapa, it's just not as clear cut. Particularly with, say, for example, tupuanuku and tupuarangi, it's not really above ground, below ground. It's really, they're quite mixed. And so then when we have some of our scientific indicators, it's just like, gee, really, where does that fit? And, some assumptions were made, and so some assumptions needed to be checked But the beauty of the wānanga process that we applied, where we're just constantly coming together, and having to really, talk these things out. So the point is, it was a real beautiful, we were really good mates, I might add, by the end of this process. Actually, even I would say from our second or third wānanga in, it became really clear the level of openness, the level of respect that was required, for what everybody brought to this process, and just really remaining, teachable, I suppose, and open to learn. And that's on both sides. Like, I absolutely loved all the scientific, some of the scientific kōrero that I learned. That was new for me. Anyway, that was my overall takeaway from this piece. There were some specific learnings, though, and insights that came. As I mentioned earlier, the inequities within our science system were quite clear, and that there wasn't, there just isn't as much mātauranga Māori-based indicators and data, available for us to draw on. And we don't need to get into, the why that in this space that is the case, other than to say it was very noticeable in terms of what kōrero tuku we had available to actually include in this report. Early on in the piece, we definitely needed to check this deficit perspective that started to emerge, in the sense that this focus on loss for Maori and everything that's going bad, and the impacts of colonization and the impacts of land taking, and and the loss of culture and all of that. And quite early on we were like, whoa, taiho, hold on. There's actually some really innovative, transformative culture building, tikanga building, nation building mahi going on as well. So let's ensure that we capture all of that kōrero. So definitely had to check that, and particularly within and this is a Māori-specific thing, but it was definitely the feedback we received from some of our Māori experts was, yes, it is good having these national level indicators, national level data sets, but for it to have any real meaning, it comes down to identity and, and our, the way we do things here. It really needs to be, at least, data at a regional, I mean, obviously, we were people saying, iwi level, but definitely national level, can sometimes be too generic, have any real impact for those who are really working on the ground. Yeah, so those were interesting. But then finally, as I mentioned earlier, this this cool positive challenge to integrate paradigms, and that really came from talking, really, and sharing experiences and sharing perspectives. Again, bringing that Western science model together with a whakapapa matariki based way of viewing the world, that needed some. Yeah, we had some good kōrero around that, and I really enjoyed that. And I mean, all the different people, we all learned from each other's tikanga, really. One of the comments at the end of the project was you could markedly see the lift in some of our non-Māoris' reo capability, and even, ability, learn karakia and stuff. And then also, again, I was really grateful to learn scientific stuff. So that was good. And what I will say is, the reason I put this visual here is, again, it's probably representative of, compromises need to be made. But there was the proposal to include this as the map of Aotearoa for the report. But, anyway, we'll get there on. What I will say, my final comment, and this is a genuine comment from me, is just the genuine goodwill and the genuine intention, to produce the work with integrity. Yes, some compromises needed to be made on both sides. Definitely, we were very mindful that, this is a very new thing for not just the Ministry for the Environment, but for any public sector organisation or any ministry at least. This was quite innovative to, so strongly put, Ngā Tauranga Māori, or at least Matariki, to the fore. It's never been done before, to my knowledge, across our New Zealand government system. And I suspect this would be the very first, we're talking about a national, state-led innovation that has been informed by Indigenous knowledge. I'd be very surprised if there are other countries who have done this. Not too dissimilar to Matariki being the first, national holiday, that is inspired by, an Indigenous worldview. But I really do mihi to the MFE and Stats NZ, leadership for being open to, doing things differently. Yeah, so those are some of the insights that were gained. And so I do just come back to, this key message here. And again, this key message is based on experience, based on practical application. It's not some ideal in the sky. And so I would hold out this report as being an example of this in practice. Ka whai, nā reira, koina taku kōrero i tēnei rani. Ka motu, ngā mihi.
Ngā mihi kia koe, James. Thank you for your kōrero this morning. As you may know, the Regional Council has embarked on a journey itself, looking at Mātauranga Māori, how we start to begin at looking to applying that to our processes, our plans, our policies. So I think this morning we would have all appreciated the mahi that you've been doing, helping MFE, as you say, to find innovative ways to look at how these processes and projects are going to look like, led by Indigenous knowledge. So, that's exciting for all of us. And that's certainly transformational change that we've been talking about in the last few months. So thank you for the presentation. Can appreciate the process you went to and how I could see it was one of your best projects, having to go and visit the 19 iwi that we did. I'll take my hat off to you, to do all that ground truthing, to, I guess, give you some sort of mandate to go back and start framing the framework that you developed via MFE. So, that's great to hear. I'm going to open it up to the councillors and those around our table for questions to you, James, but thank you. Councillors, any questions? Te Taru, I can see your hand up, so we'll start with you.
Tēnā koe te rangatira, James, mō tō whakātūranga kia mātou I tēnei rā. Kaupapa nui a tātou katoa, te mātauranga Māori. Hey, look, James, thanks for the presentation. And what you've portrayed really is the virtues of co-creation and co-design right at the start. I'll avoid the term co-governance I mean, I'd rather go straight to the operations on the ground and say that you guys have exemplified that. And obviously you've had fun, and obviously trying to sometimes force the round peg into the square hole doesn't work. And I think that just also says to me that there are times when it fits and there are times when we depart. And I can recall, you know, when Matariki was first celebrated at Te Papa back in 2001, 2002, conversations that were had with the Carter Observatory in trying to match the two. It was agreed that there were certain synergies and agreed that there were some difficulties sometimes matching up. So in that context of your journey, I mean, it's great the relationship that we built, but what were some of the things that you departed from or that you left on the table as opposed to sort of merging to some mutual arrangement or mutual agreement in this space?
Left on the table. To be honest, I can't think of anything left on the table. However, right from the beginning, we were relatively clear and then potentially being realistic that what we were able to produce with the resource available and the time available would be barely scratching the surface of what, you know, could potentially be done. So let's be very clear. This was not a fertility-based partnership, you know, at work. Number two, you know, the depth of mātauranga, you know, that we could have presented in a report such as this was, you know, just as much limited by, you know, the resource that we were able to bring. For example, you know, when I say mātauranga Māori researchers at 1, 2, maybe 3, you know, three dedicated to that piece, whereas on the other side, you know, there was like a dedicated team of at least 1, 2, 3, at least 3, maybe 4. But then for each different chapter, brought in senior advice, you know, principal advisors. And so, yeah, but again, it was good to get it out there. So we have shown, you know, what is possible. It's a good first step. And my vision would be an entirely Māori-led report, completely framed and completely using all mātauranga Māori. I have no clue what that would look like, but I am deeply curious as to how both that process and that outcome would look.
Yeah, thanks, James. And I really appreciate your kōrero. And actually, much congratulations to the MFE for taking such a big step in innovation. You know, I guess the big challenge for them will be how do they implement that throughout their policy settings and work into the future. So congratulations, mate. Well done.
I think it'd be safe to say that the ministry is having to manage certain kickback to the approach that they've taken with this report, but you know, that was always to be expected.
Got it. Thanks, Ben.
Councillor Lees.
Sure, James. I actually did look at the report when it came out, and I found it really attractive, and I thought it served a really good purpose in educating the wider population around Maori concepts. But I've got 2 questions. One is, was it a very slow process? For example, how long did it take you to reach agreement? And 2, you mentioned the need for rohi level indicators and that it was hard to actually find the data on the indicators at a national level. So just considering the length of time that it may have taken you to develop an agreement, whether or not you feel it's practical and achievable to get rohi level indicators.
So I mean, at least 2 responses to that. In terms of the time it took to produce the report, I don't know whether that's what you mean, but I know that this is probably the fastest report that they produced. I know that they said that much, and for what we have produced a report in the shortest period of time that they have done in the past. In that respect, it isn't as deep as previous synthesis reports, because we were also aware that this was a transitional format going from previous into our new environmental reporting regime as that is coming in under the Act. And so we weren't looking to go as deep in terms of both data collection and analysis as previously in the past. And there was a sense of introducing a more broader and a different approach to reporting. As to whether or not they pick that up in the future remains to be determined. In terms of rohe level indicators, I suppose my comment there was coming more from a Māori perspective. But I think I'd make 2 comments in relation to that. Number 1, let's be clear. There are some national level indicators, that are relevant. I think where the meaningfulness comes in is the nature of the data that is used to report on that, and you can just get more, more granular level or more meaningful if that data is actually coming from the region. So I think the indicator might be, it's just as useful, but it's the nature of the data that you use to report on that, which will in turn go to, influence and inform policy and strategy. But then secondly, again, sometimes at that rohe level, and at least from a Māori perspective, but I suspect this would be the same more broadly, there are just some species, or there are some concepts, or there are some ecosystems that can only be found, in some regions, and which are held important by communities, for which there may not be, because they're not held in other areas of Aotearoa, an indicator for that region, may not make the cut, because, it's only, most of the pounamu is held in the South Island, for example, or, volcanics and what have you, and so they just don't get the cut, whereas, they'll be very relevant for us here. So, well, no, not pounamu, obviously, but yeah, so that's what I was meaning from that.
I probably just would like to be quite brief, if you like, a mini skirt overview, where we may look at the overall picture and covering the main points. So what I'm saying is, who did you consult? Because there's a number of things that you've outlined. It's not very difficult to answer, because there's some of us that have walked the talk in terms of the moon and stars and Matariki. For instance, just recently, Matariki, there's a page that went through Matariki. It was called Matariki a Puapua. Matariki a Puapua is when all the puddles, the river gets rough and there's puddles. And when I was shearing, those are the puddles we used to go and hunt, because the pukeko and the pigs and all that, they go to those puddles. They hunt. You work it out. That's how it is. These are the phases in Matariki. Matariki a Puapua, and that's one side of it. And of course, there's this is the Mātauranga Māori. I'm talking about. The walk the talk. And the excursions, the travelling of the eels back to Hawaii. There's certain apuapuis, one between Motiti and Power, between Motiti and the Makitu coastline. And of course that goes right back to Ngātaurira, these stories. And of course Ngātaurira went down through Te Awatātua down to Tongariro. The prediction of the train disaster that happened, it was actually predicted in history. And there was a scientist who actually described that in 1926. And the disaster happened in 1952, the Tangiwai disaster, when the train went over. There's a historical content that's wrapped up in the movement of the Mātauranga Māori, in the Matariki and all those things. So I'm just wondering, have you consulted with people with gold cards, grey hair and rear vision mirrors, the old people, to get a view? Because we're going through a stage of the knowledge that we have. Your story, my story, somewhere lies the truth and the scientific knowledge. And I think that, I don't want to say, but you may be bogged down in scientific knowledge, still on the discovery. What's your comment?
Ka pai. Tēnā koe te rangatira. Have at least 3 responses to that. Firstly, robust debate around Matariki, Puanga. Matariki is this way in the Uruwera. Matariki is different, up in the far north. But we did need to draw a line, really, and having Rani Matamua as the lead in this particular case, he had quite a strong influence. Secondly, that said, we did have wānanga with the likes of Rereata Makiha and other external reviewers just to wānanga and kōrero. So again, I really can't emphasize too much the importance of wānanga in this particular process. And I've done some work with other, public sector, bodies, and I'm really, I do take my hat off to the time, at least, time and space to actually wānanga with these one. But what I will say is, throughout the process, there was definitely an acknowledgement that for different rohe throughout Aotearoa, there were different understandings or conceptions of Matariki, Puanga, what have you. And then finally, and this goes back to a comment from the chair, just to address a potential misconception. The mahi that I did with the Tamaki Makaurau Mana Whenua Forum and the 19 iwi, that I was true to that mahi as terms of the context of the experience that I brought to this piece. And so we didn't engage with all 19 of those iwi for the purposes of Environment Aotearoa 2022. What I will say, though, is another innovation from this project, and I do want to also acknowledge Adi Gray. I don't know what her title is, but she heads the Maori data within the Ministry for the Environment. This was her, no mai tahu tērā wahine. She led a lot of this piece, and it was her suggestion to do what we ended up calling, it's a crude term, but a mātauranga Māori audit, whereby any of the research that we came across to inform the reporting of this, of this report, we didn't just go with the distinction of, if it's in the public domain, it's publicly available mātauranga, and if it's in the private domain, even if, some of the kōrero was available in report or was made available in public spaces, We went through every piece of Mātauranga Māori and contacted directly either the iwi or the Māori organisation, or in some cases the marae, to explain to them, this is the Mātauranga that we're looking to use, this is the purpose for which we're using it, this is the way in which we're looking to reflect it in this report. Is that okay with you? So that's bringing in some of those Y262 Māori intellectual and cultural property considerations, and just holding ourselves to account to, where is this knowledge from? And the reason I mentioned that is, so Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, for example, connected with them directly in relation to their Mātauranga Māori about their manuaute, ceremony that they have up at Takaparawhau there. So.
Can I just make one more comment? And I'll just put it in plain English. When full moon arrives, it dictates the weather from different areas, because on full moon, from midnight to midday, tells you the weather for the month in that area. So if it's raining up north and it's fine down here, then the weather down here will be fine, and up north for the month will be wet. Yeah. Or if you go from midnight, say midnight to 1 o'clock in the morning, the beginning of the month would be that will dictate the weather. So it alters, but the weather still dictates. The moons and the stars still dictate the weather for the month. And that's why I asked you, who have you consulted on these matters? Because some people have walked that talk.
James, I've just got one question. You raised the kororo around the clashes you had, and I recall when we embarked on the journey here at Toi Morning, correct me if I'm wrong, Katarana, that may have been 6-7 years ago, when we started to discuss how we looked at Mātauranga Māori within the work that we do here in Toi Morning, right from policy setting right down to implementation of those on the ground. And I know there was a lot of conversations around then, bearing in mind the clash that you raised, about what that process should look like. And you're saying you haven't quite figured that out yet. And one of the things in our discussion with tangata whenua throughout our Toi Moana region, the fear was around integration. And I see this word has been used today around integration of Mātauranga Māori. And the fear of integration of Mātauranga Māori was the fear of diminishing or having to compromise Mātauranga Māori in that integration. And so at that time, we were discussing that should it really be an alignment with Western science, not an integration. So they travelled their different pathways, recognised the importance of both dichotomies, and at the journey that both of those had to take, at some point, one would leave the other. And that way they felt that Mātauranga Māori would not be compromised. Because in the current structure, in the current process, it is predominantly Western science. And that was a big fear of the Mātauranga Māori practitioners in this region. And so from that time up to now, and listening to you today, because now what we have being introduced from that grassroots level that we traversed is now the focus of where it comes from the academic perspective. And I guess for us who started the journey from the grassroots, now joining up the academic, and that was another fear. It was what happens when it starts to be taken over from an academic perspective. Because it's just like Mari was saying, for the practitioners, it was about the story. The data was in the story of Mātauranga Māori, how it was handed all through story. And then with the introduction of Western science came the data. And then in some cases, it was the data that was starting to lead, but the story was not being told. And so I guess my tono to you then is that when you're looking for the process of how Mātauranga Māori would lead out, maybe it is about the alignment and not so much the integration. In that way, I think you maintain that whole mana around Mātauranga Māori, and the application becomes more palatable for those who hold the Mātauranga Māori to actually share it with others. I think we've got to be mindful that the protection of that is first and foremost to the holders. And that's just my comment around that clash thing, because I think we can get rid of the clash if there's equal acknowledgement, equal respect with that almost parallel process of what you develop of how you're going to apply Mātauranga Māori and Western science alongside one another, and not so much the integration of the both. And no doubt, at some point, there will be an integration there, because there'll be a knowledge that it's okay to integrate, maybe, but so that's, I guess that's my kōrero to you. It's about alignment versus integration. Kia ora.
May I respond?
Aye.
Oh, ka pai.
Aye.
Firstly, because I didn't realize that this was going to go public as well. I'd bring it down from a clash. I'd bring it down from a clash between the leads. We had a period of getting to know each other. How's that? That clash is a bit strong. Number two, completely agree. I see this, well, not only just for this project, but just in general. You know, we have at least, I really like the braided rivers approach, but we have at least 3 streams going on here, at least 3, and that's pretty crude. Number one, Western science. Number 2, Mātauranga Māori. For the specific purposes of this piece, what we might have seen is, two little koawa around chalk from that one to produce, and I suppose I really appreciate what you're saying around alignment with integration. Integration in this case meant solely in that we have a particular report that has tried to blend the two, but my hope is that that doesn't detract from the 2 streams going here. And as I mentioned earlier, very clear from the outset that this was A, a very new approach, B, barely scratching the surface. And again, my vision, and I think this might be where the alignment piece comes in, I just think it would be amazing to see, a Mātauranga Māori report, completely designed by Mātauranga Māori researchers within a fully formed, Mātauranga Māori based framework, paradigm, and also given the appropriate time and resource and expertise to build that, because that is what Mātauranga means. So, in summary, I would not see 2 streams, and I agree with you, I do not see 2 streams doing this. I do see at least, those various braided streams going that way, those various braided streams going that way. And for the purposes of this piece, 2 of those core works happen to do that, but that ought not at all impact the integrity of, say, this Mātauranga Māori piece here. Oh, look, and on that, you guys got a taste of my online facilitation with this whole project. I did a lot of this. I didn't quite have the technical, I did a lot of handwork. So, how far?
Kia ora. Thank you, James. Thank you for your presentation to us this morning. Kia ora.
Bye. Ngā mihi.
Ngā mihi. Our next presenters are present, so I'm going to go hand straight to our next presenters. We have beautiful ladies present in the room with me. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping the gun. It's not about our beautiful ladies. I'm going to Zoom. Tēnā koe Ian. I'm jumping the gun here. You are the next presenter. No mai hara mai, Ian. I'm going to hand the rākau to you and allow you to start your presentation. Kei a koe.
Okay, kia ora. Manawa mai te Maori nuku, manawa mai te Maori rangi, ko te Maori kei ahau, he Maori kipua. Ka pakuru mai te pō, tau mai te Maori, haumi e, hui e, tāiki. Ka nui te mihi, me tuatahi ki te rangatiro mo tō karakia kia tātou. Tuarua, ngā mihi kia koe te rangatiro tēnei komiti. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. Yes, so there'll be a tag team approach here. I have Wolfgang co-presenting with myself. It's a true privilege and honour to be able to speak to whānau from my motherland. So on my mother's side, she was a Hata and a Rogers from Ngaitai, Torire, and o Mauramutu Marae, te whakatohia. And on my father's side, I'm connected affiliations with Te Aitanga Mahaki and Ngāti Porou. Yeah, so I'll just, before I get into the first slide, I'd just like to ask Wolfgang to introduce himself too, please.
Thanks, Ian. Ko Drakensberg te maunga, ko Tugela te awa, ko te tonga o Awherika me te mana o ku tūranga waiwai, he oi ko tūranga nui a kiwa tōku kāinga hau. So I was born in Germany and I grew up in South Africa, but Turanganui or Gisborne is now my home. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. So I make up the second part of this presentation. I'm a scientist, specializing in freshwater, stormwater, and wetlands, but have been fortunate recently to be included in work in the Te Maori space, which has led to my work with Ian, working on the MFE Kai Kete. And I think I'll leave it at that. I'll just maybe just say thanks to Katarina to make this presentation possible today, and also Anaru, who's also in this meeting room. I'll hand back to Ian.
Kia ora, Wolf. Again, yeah, also like to acknowledge Katarina and the whanaunga Anaru for their huge support through the kete. Just sort of like to go a bit off track and just talk about the partnership that Wolfgang and I, or some of the mahi we achieved or helped to lead with iwi back here in Gizzy and the Gisborne District Council. Particularly with regards to removal of mortuary waste or tikanga-based solutions to removing mortuary waste from our sewage system, from our rivers and our moana. So we're really happy with how that panned out, and just following on from the discussions around the table for Dr. Hudson's kōrero, Western science, my tauranga Māori, where do they fit? I think the example of removing mortuary waste was totally not based on Western science, because all the scientific proof was saying, well, so many milligrams of milliliters, undetectable, whatever. But my tauranga Māori was saying, gee, our tūpapaku are sacred, they're tapu. We have to continue to respect and dignity for our tūpapaku in all their phases. We also have to respect our mahinga kai, our rivers and our awa. So that sort of paradigm monumental shift within the GDC to get that bylaw passed. And I'm saying, well, not just walk from I've got 30 years of raru and contentious and acrimony to get us to that point, which we got to last year, was based on my tauranga Māori. And we moved and we brought together the community. And they said, oh, is this really a thing? Oh, no, that's not good. And so it didn't matter what culture, we all agreed, and the community agreed, and then the councillors and the iwi leaders agreed, let's sort this out. And yes, I think it's sort of a practical example. So what we're trying to do today, we're going to give you practical examples of our mahinga kai kete, but that's sort of something that was happening in parallel to this kete that you guys have in front of you. Yeah, so yes, for our presentation, we're going to unpack the kete, bring out some of the things that were left out on the table through the process, and then provide a practical example of how all those policies, plans and whatnot, how they have to be dealt with or grappled with for us with our gumboots and our waders in the water. So firstly, I'd like to go to slide 1, please. Awesome. Oh, I can't read the screen well. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so yeah, firstly, he aha te mea nui, tangata he tangata he tangata. So a lot of hands. The kete was derived from a lot of hands, and there are the names of a lot of people that contributed. So we start with Mahinga Kai practitioners and consultants. So Barry Matuku, Huri Moanahami, Marlene Benson, Sam McDonald, Anne-Marie Mackay, Sam Tamarapa from Ngāti Mutunga over there in Urenui. Given our timing, I'll just focus on the most important people, which are the people that are the Bay of Plenty. So Tu O'Brien and Kataraina, they hosted us. We drove through and we met with Gina Muhi, Nicola Green and Anaru. And so yeah, they were some of the key people that we met with in creating the kete. So if we move to slide 2, please. Okay, so yeah, I think this flows on nicely and logically from the last meeting you guys hosted, Enix, Sykes and Tina Paro. So they gave you a great presentation on Te Manawa Te Wai. And so as we said, the Mahinga Kai compulsory value is like a natural progression, implementation and practical example of giving effect to Te Manawa Te Wai. Yeah, that's the way we saw this piece of that puzzle. So you're giving effect to Te Manawa Te Wai. Next slide, please. Wonderful. Some key themes here. The principles are based on mana whakahaere, kaitiakitanga and manaakitanga, and governance, stewardship, care and respect. So we related throughout the kete, we relate how Mahinga Kai, the practice of, the traditions, the importance of, relate to those 3 key principles. One more slide for me, please. Right. It was like diagrams to explain kia ora ki tai, maunga ki te moana. So in this particular slide created through the Ministry for the Environment, what we're trying to put across here is that Mahinga Kai now needs to go through the same process, or is given the same elevated importance as the other compulsory national values. And I think that's a huge improvement on the previous iterations of the NPSFM and the National Objectives Framework. So I'll now hand it over to Wolfgang, who will take you through the kete itself. Thank you.
So thanks, Ian. And yeah, just to reiterate, it's great to be here and to be talking on this kaupapa. So the kete itself, the primary purpose it has been produced has been to help councils and tangata whenua work together in enabling Mahinga Kai to be integrated as part of the NOF process. Ian said previously, Mahinga Kai and Maori freshwater valleys weren't in the NPSFM, National Policy for Freshwater Management, but in 2020 there was significant change, and of course that brought with it some significant challenges, and that's why the kete is quite a long kete, but it does take you through all the aspects that councils and tangata whenua that we engaged with noted were important. So it starts off by just introducing the gardens and linking it through to Te Mana or Te Wai. And then it really contextualizes Mahinga Kai in terms of the NOF process. Mahinga Kai as a compulsory value is very different to other compulsory values which are very scientific and quantitative, whereas Mahinga Kai is qualitative. And so a real focus of in putting this kit together was to make sure that we made the NOF process relevant to Mahinga Kai, and the kit itself has a number of examples of actually practically implementing Mahinga Kai. So taking it from this high level value to actually what you ultimately do on the ground. Section 5 was about engagement, and we found that a lot of the feedback was about engagement, and we therefore include a section on how best to engage to ensure that mana whakahaere is respected and mana whenua can talk on behalf of themselves and in terms of their rohe. We then developed a whole of tools, as well as going through existing tools. We looked at Mātauranga Maori and data sovereignty, which was well described in the previous presentation. We looked at practical monitoring and mapping, and then we also looked at where there are capability gaps, issues, etc. in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And that led on to capacity and resourcing, because to do all this mahi, we need to have enough capacity and resources. And then we had some real practical recommendations for councils to integrate Mahinga Kai into their BAU, into the business as usual. And then towards the end of the kete, we provide links, etc., to particularly useful infographics and fact sheets. We combine all the kete elements together to create one comprehensive process. There's a lot of, Ian and I were talking about this presentation before, and we could spend 40 minutes on each of these sections. And so I'll just quickly run through those very briefly, just to give you, I guess, the most important element of each section. If you go to the next slide, please. What we found was that in going through the process, there was a clear need for additional intuitive tools for tangata whenua and council to use when collaborating in the NOF process. And so we created a number of new tools which are really aimed at enabling working together and partnering in this process. Those tools, in addition to all of the good tools that already exist out there, and we've also covered all those tools in the kete. I think I'll move on from the slide then. One of the biggest findings, and also I guess particularly for me, being a scientist, was the issue of visualizing Mahinga Kai. And depending on who you spoke to, you have very different views of what Mahinga Kai was. And so we spent quite a lot of time on just exploring Mahinga Kai, and we call it Mahinga Kai 101. And really Mahinga Kai connects people with place, connects tangata with whenua. It's intergenerational, and it's a holistic and integrated value. And the reason we make those points are because very often people confuse Mahinga Kai with things like biodiversity, etc. But it's not about that. It's about the connection of tangata whenua with their why, and at least that's the experience through this process. You can just click the mouse. So, and if I can just spend maybe a few minutes going through some examples. So very often when we would speak to some parties, you just start the conversation by asking what is Mahinga Kai, and particularly within councils, we often go to, well, it's about biodiversity, abundance, and so we'd go through that process, and we'd start linking that biodiversity to the cultural practices of tangata whenua in being connected with and sustainably using that biodiversity and respecting that biodiversity. But taking it from somewhere you can measure in terms of species diversity and abundance to how it benefits and how it forms part of the lives of mana whenua. The same with water quality and water flows. All too often water quality is linked directly to Mahinga Kai, but and Ian might want to talk more about this, but like, for example, the mortuary wastewater discharge into the rivers, no Western science water quality metric can measure the impact on water quality that mortuary waste imparts on our awa. I don't know if you want to say anything else there, Ian?
Oh, no, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. That's the importance of Mātauranga Māori and Western science standing in their own two, having their own importance.
Yeah, and then same with water flows. It's often expressed as minimum flows, but really that just tells us about the flow in the water. It doesn't tell us about how those flows affect those relationships and connections of mana whenua with their awa. So we spent a lot of time visualizing Mahinga Kai and going through that with the people that we engage with through this process, and we found that was a very valuable process. And all the pictures on the left show you that. All those pictures have people in them. All those pictures have intergenerational relationships with the awa, and so that's a really important element that came through the development of the kete. If we can go to the next slide, if that's right. And so once we had those discussions, we were able to say to, or everyone got to the point of, well, actually, Mahinga Kai is about a lot more than just numbers, species, flows. And so on the left there of the slide, we've got all sorts of themes and I guess values that came up through the process, which someone at some stage links to Mahinga Kai. And so it was a process of discovery, really, and taking it from conventional Western science metrics and measurement to something much deeper. We can move to the next slide. Okay. And linked to the previous slide, now you need to know, the previous slide was about what is Mahinga Kai, or the elements of Mahinga Kai, and then in going through a national objectives framework process, ultimately you have to look at impacts and how you manage things and mitigate things, and so you need to understand what are the impacts. And so on this slide, this is a sticky note page of all of the different physical impacts that were identified by councils and tangata whenua through our process. From threats to species and resources, to water quality, farming impacts on the awa, and then changes in hydrology. So those are all the physical impacts, and what we term those visible. But if you go to the next slide, what is a lot harder to bring across, and there's a lot less understood, are the invisible impacts, and we found those to be more important even than the physical visible impacts, because you could have a perfect environment with no physical impacts on it, but you still may not be able to practice being a kai, at least not to the extent that you'd like to. And one example that was raised was protected areas management. And so, you've got all the physical attributes of that protected area are perfect. There's no human impact. But if tangata whenua don't have access to those lands, then they are not able to practice Mahinga kai. And so it's a zero score for Mahinga kai. So yeah, the process is really enlightening in terms of those invisible impacts and how those really need to be put up front if we are going to be able to integrate Mahinga kai as a compulsory value in the north. Go to the next slide, please. So, like with the previous slides, these resources were really developed for the purpose of use by councils and mana whenua as they deem fit, if they want to use them. And so we've created these resources that can be used to sit around a table at, to go through, to add to take off, to make relevant to your rohe. And this here is one of the other infographics that were produced, and what we wanted to make clear in this infographic was that Mahinga kai resources are not just about harvesting eels, and that was a recurring theme. If you ask someone about Mahinga kai, it's harvesting eels and not much else, but really it relates to the water, so all things in the water, all the life in the water. It relates to the land around the water and all the life around there that tangata whenua would have historically harvested and used. It includes materials that you can eat, as well as used to make baskets, etc. Panamu was used as an example in the previous presentation, and it includes the materials in the earth. So this infographic was put together really to just to illustrate that Mahinga kai is not about just aquatic life and one species, but it encompasses a whole range of different resources that can be used and form part of those relationships and connections with the awa. Go to the next slide, please. And like with the narrow view of that can be out there, and I'm not talking about all the pukena and rangatira that really know about, and tohunga that know about Mahinga kai, like the people in this room meeting today, but the people that are not familiar with this topic don't also, like with the resource, the wide range of resources, it's also about the fact that Mahinga kai relates to the wide range of water bodies. It's not just about the river, it's about the groundwater, it's about the repo, it's about the road to the lakes, and it's about the river mouth. So it's really is far reaching. And then we included in this infographic also some context in terms of law and impact on those watercourses. And again, this was put together with the view to being able to sit around a table and making this relevant to mana whenua within a specific rohe. And this slide also illustrates the Kiuta Kitai approach, the mountains to the sea, and all water bodies on the land, under the ground, on the way down to the sea. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide I'll go through before Ian takes over again. So taking the Mahinga Kai value down into outcomes, attributes, target attributes, states, limits, and action plans, that we found was the biggest challenge faced in implementing the NOF. Because Mahinga Kai is a value that is about people, and because it is something that might be quite difficult to measure, and it's qualitative or quantitative, it is something that's quite difficult to take through the NOF process, because it's not just saying, we want to make sure the river meets this water quality standard, and this is what you do to achieve it, but it's really, you keep having to bring it back to those customs and practices of mana whenua. And so we included a number of examples, practical examples in the kete, and Ian will we'll talk about one of the attributes we developed in collaboration with an iwi, just to show you how this can all ultimately look as you are down the process from vision to attributes. The kete also recognized the critical need for effective engagement. In essence, asking or going to mana whenua as manahiri, asking mana whenua to lead that process in developing their Maori freshwater values, including Mahinga Kai. Next slide, please. Yeah, and I'll hand it back to Ian at this stage.
Oh, thanks, Wolfgang. I'll just I'm cognizant of time, and I don't want to talk about eels and tuna. One of the speakers, one of the committee members, started talking about my tauranga around tuna, and we'd love to talk about that for days on end. But I draw back to the point about successful engagement that Wolfgang was talking about, and Bay of Plenty Regional Council, I think, exemplars from what we've seen on what the awesome mahi that you guys are pushing out, moving through your rohe, huge rohe, huge number of iwi, and the mahi and the good work that we can see was quite inspiring, actually. So effective engagement is key, and that all comes down to relationships, connectedness with our people. And Mahinga Kai, for some reason, it also brings our people together. Like everyone seems to have a tuna story or an eel story. And without getting to the numbers on that spreadsheet, looks pretty detailed. We haven't had morning tea yet, but I think it might have been two O'Brien that just talked about the importance about putting a kai on the table for marae, for hui or tangi, and keeping those practices, those protocols, the tikanga alive and fresh, and passing it on to the next generations. And I can see it now. We've got some scholarship recipients coming through. That's quintessential to all this thing about Mahinga Kai. It brings life, in essence, Maori into this thing we call Mahinga Kai. So our kete is a humble, complementary example of something that might be helpful to different different regional councils around the country. And Wolf and I were just really privileged to be part of a big team that we learned so much on the journey. It was very privileged and honoured. So I'd just like to pass it back to the committee and see if you have any questions or comments on the kete, please.
Kia ora kōrua. Ngā mihi kia kōrua. I'm going to ask councillors if they have any questions to our presenters. Councillor Iti.
Tēnā kōrua. He mihi tēnei kia kōrua mo tō te kāturanga kia mātou. Au he tino ki o koutou o tātou kite. He momona me ki just having a scan through the kete that you guys have put together, and it's really robust, which is amazing. I've sat in on a few freshwater engagement workshops, which we've had with through this council with various groups. And one thing that's always really stuck out to me is that the two worlds that we are trying to bring together and the challenges and difficulty in that. As a council, we're dealing with NPSFMs, FMUs, NOFs, all of the other acronyms, and you walk into a workshop and we just start throwing them out because we're so used to using the terms, and you have to have a glossary basically. But with that glossary, you also have to try and give context. So when you're just meeting with people or groups, there's all that background knowledge that you have to have. And I'm just wondering, I'm looking at this and I really enjoyed the what do you call them there, the diagrams, the graphics that you guys are using, because when you're, as we know as Maori, I know there's kind of a common senseness to the way that things interrelate. You know, o te oranga o te wai, te oranga o ngā tangata. Simple. And that's the way that we look at things. And then you fellas are talking about NPSFMs and FMUs and the way that, you know, bureaucracy because of legislation in our society these days, the way that we construct things are very complicated. So trying to find that translation between the two, and this is actually the first time that I've seen these kinds of documents that I go, oh, you know, it'd be great to have these kinds of diagrams and colorful pictures and when we go into these engagements, because as yet, and I'm glad you think we're an exemplar, and I think in many, many ways we are, but so far I haven't seen those kinds of tools, because they are tools to communicate. In my head, I think there's still quite a big gap to be filled with. There may be third-party contractors, but people who are just real professionals in how to do that translation jobs. Because I feel sorry for our staff sometimes because they live and breathe inside of these organizations. And then we expect them to go out and suddenly be able to turn that off and become, you know, I'm thinking of like groups like Takirua, the theatre groups and stuff like that, who go and they talk about concepts and engage with people. And I just think, in looking at your work, is there a way that this council can improve by, you know, we basically don't have to talk about FMUs or NPSFMs when we go out and engage. They shouldn't actually even be mentioned. We should be talking in the terms that the people that we're talking to live in. And then it's our job to take the feedback and the data and to translate that into what we need. So I see a gap, and just looking at what you guys have brought today has highlighted that for me, that actually there's still a lot of work that we need to do, because I know we have targets to deliver our NPSFM and our policy statement, our regional policy statement by 2024, but we all know that's a bit of a push. And this is actually going to be ongoing past this. So I think there is still room for development of that engagement process. I did have a question around the hierarchy of obligations. Mainly the, you know, as I said, te oranga o te wai, a koe nā te oranga o nā tangata. And vice versa, te oranga o nā tangata, a koe nā te oranga o nā wai, te wai. So when we're talking about te mana o te wai, koe nā te tuatahi, te mea nui, pai tērā, tuarua te oranga o nā tangata, and quite often we're just saying, oh, that is drinking water, making sure that that's access to drinking water. But we actually talk about the well-being of the people. But we know as Maori the connectedness also between the cultural and social well-being of our people. And I think there's still a niggle, because that doesn't come until the third obligation, the social and cultural, economic well-being of people. So I think, have you got any thoughts on when you've been putting this together? I know that there's still a little bit of debate around those second and third obligations, and a hierarchy of obligations under Te Mana o Te Wai. Do you have any comment on that?
A lot there. A brilliant kōrero. I think it's. I'll start with. Okay, so the kite is out there. I think to help with engagement and to help with your kaimahi, and is I think the next step for this process would be to develop learning resources and ways of actually articulating what's in the book, like in a kit, it's a written word, and that way, as you said, about there are different ways to communicate these concepts, not necessarily just in text. So I think giving us the toolkit will be through like prep sort of training or education that helps turns the pictures and the text into something tangible that is site specific, people specific, tangata whenua specific as well. As a hierarchy, I'll pass it over to Wolf. Yeah.
Great question, re the hierarchy. I mean, personally, I have difficulty with hierarchies like this because I find them all interlinked. Placing the health of and well-being of water bodies first, and then the health of needs of people, such as drinking water, second, and then the third one, being able to provide for social, economic, and cultural well-being. I don't see how you can separate them, to be honest. And what we found through the process was tangata whenua felt very strongly that they are part of the ecosystem, and so to separate it out is intuitively quite difficult because they're all linked. So I don't have an answer for you at this stage. It's a tough one.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. I've Councillor White, Councillor Lees. Kia koe te taru.
Kia ora. Tēnā korua ngā rangatira mo tō kōrero ki a mātou I tēnei rā. Hey, look, I'm not really sort of been drilling into the detail of what you said, just trying to get the context of what you said and the concepts behind this. Really, on one hand, you're dealing with a quantitative system, and on the other hand, that demands facts and figures, and on the other hand, you're dealing with a qualitative system that actually been brought out of millennia of time of observations and interactions with humankind and everything around them. And actually trying to bring those things together is a very difficult challenge. And then the ultimate issue is one around holistic assessments of things. And you mentioned from the mountains to the sea, mai te kahui maunga ki tangaro. And I'd add to that, ko te awa ko te awa ko au, I am the river and the river is me. So we constantly want to take segments of that from a quantitative point of view and measure impact. From a qualitative, I've got that right, from a qualitative thing, mountains, the sea, Māori would look at it from the start of the water from the heavens coming down into the mountains and coming down through the rivers, and everything comes through that river and the interactions of all the plant systems and ecosystems around it, and by observations and experience, draw that knowledge from that system. So it's extremely quite difficult to actually match up the two. One is a demand for now, and the other one is a demand saying, well, intergeneration is what happened, and if we do this, this is what will happen moving forward. If you look at Maori, for example, people actually demand of the system is that, can we measure Maori? So people are trying to measure Maori. And so on one hand, Maori would say it's something inherent in you, something intuitive in you, something spiritual in you that you can get a feel for all things around you. On the other hand, somebody says, Maori, well, let's see if we can put up a dial that says this is where you are on the Maori spectrum. how much are you putting into commercial, how much are you putting into social benefit, those sorts of things, so we can measure it. So it's those sorts of demands and clashes, I think, that make some of these things challenging. So your notations around Mahinga Kai, I totally agree with. It isn't just about the what is or what you're dealing with specifically before you, but it's all those things that you draw from around that have an impact in that space to give you the ultimate solution. And I think one of the messages for the regional council is that we sometimes compartmentalize things. And actually, for example, in cleaning up an estuary, you'll focus on a particular catchment, but actually it's the headwaters from where those waters come from. It's all of those other things, climate change and other things that affect all of that flow. So look, that's what I've been seeing as a common thread through this presentation and the previous one. Quantitative, qualitative, legacies in both ends. How do you make them meet? How do you make them have a conversation? Not to actually have to merge them in each other, but actually be respectful in that space as you journey down that line. What's your view on that?
Oh, tautoko, yeah, exactly. He waka te noa, we're all in it together. So as you say, what's coming down from the mountains affects us on the coast and vice versa on the sea and the hydrological cycle and all these things. So I think it's an exciting time. I think Matariki, the holiday, I think it might have been the first Indigenous holiday ever, I think. And even though Matariki is specifically Maori, the constellations connect us all. So I love those sort of dichotomies and the sheer understandings and everything. So yeah, I totally tautoko your kōrero e te rangatira. And Mahinga Kai is one piece of that puzzle. And I think it relates back to the previous question from about hierarchies. Actually, are they hierarchies or are they all the same? And everything should be treated the same. And through that importance, and yeah, we'll get better outcomes. Yeah,
in terms of the kete and you know the one thing that I mean the purpose was to enable this as a value to be taken through the NOF process, which the NOF is I guess it's a Crown process, or it's a Western world sort of process of doing things. So that is a challenge we faced, and we got to the point where the science, the data supports the process, can support Mahinga Kai, but that the measurement of Mahinga Kai is likely to be more qualitative. And we showed you one example, which was what I'd call semi-quantitative, but there we also developed some other example attributes which are purely qualitative, which talk about tapu and noa, which talk about access to waterways and so on. So because of the NOF process, because of the way it is, you have to represent information in a certain way. And so I think we've taken it a fair way towards being able to capture that non-quantitative element. I hope that answers your question, at least in part. It's not perfect, but hopefully we're on the right track.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and I found your report really interesting. The thing that I actually struggled with was the breadth and depth of the freshwater attributes that you identified that link to Mahinga Kai. And it seems to me there's a lot of overlap with other attributes, with other values. And so I'd be interested in hearing your perspectives on which which examples we should be focusing on, because we, as was mentioned previously, we have got very tight timeframes to put together our plan. We also have a large number of iwi and hapu, and despite working really, really hard, there's very many that we haven't managed to engage with. And if we try and go too wide and too deep into all of our FMUs, we won't have any show of getting anywhere near a completed plan by the government's timeframes. So knowing that water quantity and water quality and those sort of attributes have their own sort of framework. Which particular parts of the Mahinga Kai kiti that you've identified for us are the ones that are absolutely essential in your opinion?
I'll jump in then, Ian, if that's all right. I think Mahinga Kai is personal. It's personal to mana whenua within a rohe. And so if there's one thing that I've learned through this process is that there's no way that we can predetermine what mana whenua want to use as their attributes, as their tohu. What we did find in going through this process with an iwi, we did go through it in developing some attributes. We ended up settling on about 4 or 5 that were specific to that iwi and that were the most important for them. There was a recognition that you can't have 20 extra Mahinga Kai attributes because it's not practical, it's not workable, it's not, you can't monitor that much, it's not affordable. So it is a process of being honest, going through the process and saying what can be achieved, but enabling mana whenua to identify those that are most important. And you'll find if you have 4 or 5 Mahinga Kai, maybe even less attributes, they do interrelate, and as a unit they will then achieve, well, in our example, they achieved what that iwi wanted to achieve, and supported by all those compulsory Western science and off values that already exist. We're not saying that those are not relevant, they are relevant, but they support the Mahinga Kai attributes.
Absolutely, and Kataraina and Anadu and the team would know which of those attributes are applicable or not for your rohe. So yeah, I'm sure your team will be working hard. They have been working hard and making great progress towards that. So.
And they're only examples. So in some areas, our examples may all be irrelevant because it might be a totally different environment and different needs. So unfortunately, it does need that engagement. Fortunately, for mana whenua to identify their values, which is why we also included that section on the engagement.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think evolutionary is when the two worlds meet. But it's difficulty of those two worlds meeting if we don't understand one another. Take, for instance, the 2 key things would be Rahui and Maori. What the hell is that? Well, Rahui means to place some sort of restriction, whereas Maori is the life force of all things, a bit like Jesus Christ. The life force of all things means that if you take our system and fish quotas, fishing quotas guarantees to fish out. Now, if we take our worldview, our Maori worldview, you only fished when the fish were there. So you fish to the seasons. You put a rahui on, says, don't go and get any more snapper at this time of the year. They're still breeding. You go and fish for other foods. But what the system says to us, you've got a quota system, so go down there, get your quota system, you're guaranteed to fish out. Yeah. The Maori part of it, the life force of all living things means, have you consulted the fish? You consult the people, and you've got to consult the fish too. When are you going to breed? What's the best time to go and catch you? And those things. So it's quite simple. It's not brain damaging stuff. It's just straight to the point. But science has to try and put a mini-skirt report to that. Just the broad picture and the personal stuff covered.
Okay.
I just want to make a comment.
You were making comment. He was making comment. There was no question in there. Just making comment. Kia ora koutou. There don't appear to be any other questions, but firstly, my apologies to you, Wolf, and I didn't include you in the mihi with Ian. Aroha mai. But thank you to you both for your presentation. I kind of share the view that Toi has made in the graphic presentation that you gave. I wasn't quite sure myself when it became a new value that's coming out in the RMA. So you've certainly explained to me how that will be applied and how it could be applied and how it should be applied. So ngā mihi to you both. The other thing that I was sharing with Councillor Iti is the kite is great and it's great to have it in text. But I think, you know, for use, wider use audience, we would love to see either doco and small movies. I think Councillor Iti might take on a part-time job in movie making and put together movies from rohe to rohe, applying the Mahinga Kai project, as well as what came out of our previous conversations. Because I think one of the other challenges, you know, for our non-Māori counterparts is often having to understand this word coming through, but requiring more help about learning about Te Ao Māori. And you know, the question that Councillor Nees posed, I could totally understand where she was coming from that question. But I guess if you take it from the perspective of the three Māori councils sitting here, for us it's kind of obvious. It's the holistic that determines what that breakdown comes. So when you look at the Western science structure, everything's in silos and they've taken from the holistic. And so, you know, for the three of us, it's quite easy that we go back to the bigger picture to see where all of this mahi that you're now starting to turn out fits in the whole. And that's always how we have to present anyway when we're going out to whānau. You can't just go rushing and say, well, actually we're here to talk about the mana o te wai. You've got to go back to the beginning and where te mana o te wai fits. So thank you for your presentation, because you've definitely provided me a cog in the bigger wheel in understanding why the value of Mahinga Kai, because you're absolutely right. It is just not about the fresh water. It's about that whole relationship that, you know, as one of our practitioners are saying, we are the water and the water is us. You know, and we say that in our pepa. So just thank you for reminding me that I've got stuck in my little silo talking about fresh water and forgetting, you know, the other side. So yeah, ka mihi kia kōrua, and thank you for coming to share your mahi. Kia ora.
Me koe, me koutou hoki, and we'll have a talk to MFE, see if they can get some funds for your movie stars over there to print the little video clips.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillors, I'm not sure whether we're on time or running on time. Are we going to give everybody a break? Keith, why won't you can join us. We're going to take a break, so we're going to take a 10-minute break and let everybody have a breather, go get a glass of water, more water, and a cup of coffee. Kia ora. Kia ora koutou anō. Oh, kia ora koutou anō. We're ready to start the next part of our program, getting down the home straight, and we're going to, on mihi to our ladies, and our mihi ladies, welcome to the Komiti Maori, and I'm not going to take up your time without further ado. Kia koutou.
Kia ora koutou, ko Julie Shepherd. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Julie Shepherd, tuku ingoa. Many of you know me in the decade that I've been involved in Pirirako Hapu environment management. I currently work at Western Bay District Council as a kaupapa Māori planner. I work there part-time so I can keep my finger in other little pies that, you know, we want to progress as tangata whenua. And so that's a brief introduction of myself. I'll just pass you to Monique to introduce yourself.
Oh, kia ora.
You need it close.
Kia ora everybody. Komiti tuku ingoa. We've been here, I think we started this journey about 2 years ago at Rere Atu Kahia. So finally it's nice to kind of get to the table and deliver what we found over that time frame, and it has evolved, which has been really good. Loved hearing the other kaupapa that was here this morning, because, you know, it definitely aligns with what we're here to deliver today, and just kind of love the passion that, you know, you hear from different others, because it's really inspiring to see other Māori with awesome kaupapa for bettering Māori people.
Thanks, Monique. Sherry, are you able to put up that PowerPoint, please?
Just briefly to introduce this, as Monique said, we entered into a contract with Bay Regional Council, supported by Kataraina and Nathan, to develop the cultural monitor training framework. So we had initial hui with them, kind of sold them the idea, and then we got to make a start of it. And it has been a 2-year journey for many reasons, including COVID, because that's what everyone else is blaming it on. But we're here now. So next slide, please, Nene. So as part of our presentation, we will talk about the observations of cultural monitoring. We'll talk briefly about what cultural monitor is. We identified the demand on cultural monitors. We'll talk briefly about iwi and hapu and how they've been engaged throughout this journey. Then we'll talk about the research to further feasibility for cultural monitor training. And then Aroturiki training framework. What we wanted to do was take this contract a step further, because we talk about building the capacity and capability of tangata whenua, but what does it actually look like? Is that an opportunity for us to get funding to do independent research, and that's the outcome? We weren't happy with that. So we designed the training framework, which we'll talk to at the end, but it is a free taonga resource for all tangata whenua that we would like to be hosted on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council website, to be a free taonga accessible to all and any. So this has been quite a long journey. 10 years of being the Pirirako Environment Manager. I was in the role to facilitate cultural monitors, appoint them to sites, but actually it started up front when we started discussing resource consents, and that's where the agreements are hatched to engage a cultural monitor. But what we noticed was that each hapu, although they had their own tikanga autonomy, there was no kind of framework for the cultural monitors who, you know, because it's ad hoc work, it's not full time, it's as and when the developer needs. And so people are not waiting around for that role, instead they're going on to work, so you're continually having to upskill. And then in some instances that wasn't happening at all. So this design, the cultural monitor, the Aroturiki cultural monitor training framework is designed to lift capacity and capability.
Just to add to that as well, one of the things we started noticing was with some of the planners were starting to design their way around the use of a cultural monitor. And so we thought, oh, we need to be a bit smarter here and create a framework or some kind of definition around actually what a cultural monitor was. What the research showed was that there's quite a few inconsistencies, which we'll talk about shortly.
So what is a cultural monitor? A cultural monitor is someone who is tangata whenua who can whakapapa to the site or to that rohe where any modification or, to earth, waterways, anything that happens on that site that might have an effect will have a cultural effect as well. But unfortunately, through the planning processes, as Meg talks about, we often get side-shafted as something that's not required. And unless your environment manager pursues cultural monitoring right at the beginning of the conversation, it won't happen at all. And so we have archaeologists where there is legislation that outlines where they must be there and they must be involved. And cultural monitors, not so much yet. Archaeology is 90% predominantly Māori occupation. And the relationship that we have with that archaeology is actually our history. And so we are trying through this process to lift the requirement and the recognition of cultural monitoring. So the cultural monitor is responsible for culturally monitoring the effects of an activity on a site. And that may be done through a various range of things. It could be karakia, it could be just a visual assessment, it could be translocating tuna to an adjacent waterway. There's a lot involved in the taiao collectively in how we engage with it culturally, which hasn't been really spoken about. We want to ensure that the tikanga protocols of tangata whenua, which is set explicitly by that particular hapu or iwi, and we are not trying to encroach on tikanga at all. That sits with them, and so they determine how that will be set up on site. Cultural monitoring is a pathway to exercise kaitiakitanga, but it now is also under a commercial umbrella. So we have to ensure that the standards of our people, when they're out there in that commercial environment with a cultural kaitiaki lens, are upskilled and know how to manage the site, be with the people, what's involved in the activities, and where their responsibilities clearly lie. So the current demand, when we looked at, because we had a very good idea of what we wanted to design as a cultural monitoring training framework, Nathan kind of nudged us and says, hang on, we need a bit more here. So we actually entered into full feasibility, and we did quite a large volume of research. We did a lot of research to find out what the not only current demand is, but what is the current picture for our cultural monitors. So, as I said, they are often required by developers, councils utilise them when they're doing any modifications and earthworks, waterways, whether they're redesigning new wetlands. There is a need for a cultural monitor, someone who is there and is astute and clear about what is happening culturally and how that needs to be handled. Not just anyone can do that. When we did our research, as at 2022, there are 10,510 consents lodged with Waitangi Regional Council, which the majority of would have required tangata whenua engagement. But lifting the capability the capacity and capability of tangata whenua is not just a hapu by hapu approach. It needs to be a collective approach, and these types of research sets are really important to bring everybody to one platform. And then what they do with that under their own tikanga, they have that that pathway set out for them to easily follow. changes to the RMA. Well, there are some awesome changes, I believe, coming te oranga o te whaiao. That's a concept that we all believe in as tangata whenua. But earthworks development and the effects of earthworks are never going to stop, because we require development, we require housing, we require infrastructure. So cultural monitoring is something that's not going to go away, but it is something that hasn't been invested into to fully, clearly understand what is involved and how that can be more consistent. I might just pass this on to Minnie.
So part of the research, 37 leaving 260 hapu. We saw previously that there were 10,000 consents that were lodged that required tangata whenua involvement. We were unable to identify a true number or indicative number in regards to how many cultural monitors there are, because it's such a casual role. We talk a little bit more about the research and some of the skill sets there and how long cultural monitors have been in their role for. It's really important, you know, when we're going through this mahi, that the mana remains with each iwi and hapu. So just to make it really clear that this framework doesn't touch on that. This kind of gives considerations of how you might apply that and where it might be required. We learned this new whakatauki, which is real cool, and it's ki te kotahi, te kākaho, ka whaiti. When we stand alone, we are vulnerable. Ki te kāpuia, e kore e whati, but together we are unbreakable. We truly believe this. We've got some really, we've got some examples where tangata whenua cultural monitors Māori have been pushed into a structured space where they're actually monitoring out of their rohe. And for us, you know, having been kaitiaki, we don't actually believe that this is tika, it's right. But because we don't have a framework where nobody actually understands clearly what a cultural monitor's role is, we thought, oh, we'll create something so that we can get some better definition, and that's pretty much what this is. So first part of our research, we did two parts. We did heard this today, qualitative and quantitative. So with our cultural monitors, we did quantitative because it was quite hard to get them all together. 50% of the people that we interviewed, cultural monitors, had anywhere between 5 to 20 plus years experience. 37% had no idea what their role was when they first started. 58% had minimal to no training prior to starting. The majority indicated the importance of tikanga, karakia, and historical knowledge of whenua in general. 71% indicated they were interested in developing their skill set in archaeology, acts and legal requirements, health and safety, environmental effects, and effective communication and reporting. When we got these results, and we were pretty, I think we kind of already knew this, but it was really kind of, I guess, alarming to see this, you know, true information come through. And it, yeah, I guess it supported the kaupapa that we're on. So the next part was the qualitative research done by with archaeologists, crown agencies, commercial planners, land and infrastructure, developers, engineers, project managers, and senior advisors. I'll let Julie, because she was one who did all the interviewing on this, talk more about this and her finds.
So planners had a fairly good understanding of what a cultural monitor was, because it is becoming more normalised. Although not picked up or not executed or delivered appropriately, perhaps. Archaeologists we interviewed, well, actually, we surveyed 6 archaeologists, only 6, but they all responded and all, knowing to the local environment. Generally, they said working with tangata whenua was really helpful because they have that historic narrative of the site. And the local knowledge of how things are in that place. They also noticed, though, that there are cultural monitors that are not trained in any way, and actually they don't know what to be doing. They don't know what they're doing out on site. Some of them are standing there, some of them are sitting in cars, some of them are just sitting down at the driveway. Some of them though really get into it, and you can tell there is something also called the tuakana and the portiki and the whakapapa of cultural monitoring, and you can see those cultural monitors that have had that senior experience in discussion with perhaps their kaumātua or a lead cultural monitor, which many hapu have. So there's different levels of knowledge involved in it. Resource consents is another tricky area because we're, regional council may lay down a consent condition which requires cultural monitoring, but then the land developer will just push on and not even pick up on it, and then before you know it, before the hapu knows it, often is the case, the activity is being done, nobody knows what was found. Next slide, please, Naomi.
Julie, what happens in Aroha Julie? What happens in those cases if the buses
Nothing.
leave the rank? Okay.
Nothing. There's no penalties, or there are not. There's no
recommendation to that.
non-compliance from regional council because the complaint hasn't been raised and no one knows of it other than the developer. So as Nick said, we wanted to define what cultural monitoring was. We wanted to assist with creating consistency. Actually, I think it's really important that we talk to is while we designed the framework, which is a series really of 6 modules, which is outlined in the training guide. But what we did do was through various mechanisms, we actually pilot tested the training with over 52 actually kaitiaki. We ran them through the training. They got a lot of value out of it. For many, they just didn't understand that's what it was all about. Applying kaitiakitanga in a modern development space. How do you do that? Or actually looking after the taia and what's happening to it. And then to wrap up on my part, aroturiki means to monitor. And so we are looking to socialise that kupu instead of the English term cultural monitor. It fits within the whakapapa of kaitiakitanga, and my personal feeling, it's just not appropriate to call them cultural monitors when there is a more acceptable Māori term, aroturiki, to use. With the so we also looked at with the framework, did we want to form a private training entity? Is that warranted? Is there that many kaitiaki out there that we need to train? Do we want to get involved in that type of business? How's that going to play out? But actually what we've come to is in learning through the testing of delivery of training, we found that it would be more helpful to train the trainers of the hapu so that they have a knowledgeable po within their hapu iwi organisation that knows their tikanga, that can transfer that through training to their kaitiaki. So as I said, the training guide, we wanted something tangible that we could deliver to tangata whenua other than just finding out what that research was. So the training guide, as I mentioned earlier, we want to gift that as a taonga. Wasn't required of the contract. It's something that we give freely and with aroha to Baiapini Regional Council to host that on their website so that it's freely accessible to all tangata whenua. Because when you Google cultural monitoring, there's nothing. There's nothing like this. There's one company, Te Arahanga Limited, who are based in Nelson and are supported by Kaitahu. We worked I had a series of conversations with them. We've actually provided the training guide to them, and they were really thankful for it and are going to use it. So thank you all for your support in delivering this contract. We got there, it's over the line, and Monique, would you like to add anything to that? Because Monique is my colleague and she's pretty awesome. She's smart.
So I'll just talk a little bit about the importance of developing the skill sets. So, we talk about the skill sets being, land, air, water, vegetation, and our species. We're looking at a collective of specialist skill sets, ecologists, archaeologists, and every other specialist skill set. And then there is one of us. So for us to be able to ensure that we can do our job effectively, we can protect our whenua, we can be proactive with our monitoring, it's important that we know our environment and everything that all of those people do on a pretty general scale, because they're all specialist skills themselves. If we can do that, that means that we can actually respond in our role as more than just a pair of eyeballs, just to put it frankly. And this here also to support our sustainable and professional growth as mana whenua, as tangata whenua, because often if we're not doing our job kind of appropriately, professionally, the integrity of our people is not taken seriously. And so hence why we're not contacted, we just get dragged along for the ride, because our capacity is just not where it should be, in all honesty. So we think that by providing a resource that's optional, that will be able to help the capacity and capability growth of our people. So Julie's talked about, the free resource. You can review it, you can utilize it, you can amend it, you can adapt it. It's optional, it's not forcing anybody into anything, but it is a starter. It's somewhere to go. If, say, for example, we've got a lot of kind of new hapu that are kind of resurfacing and they actually don't know where to start. So this is a really good kind of starting place for them to go to and use it how they wish. Some of the areas we talk about considerations when applying tikanga, understanding consent conditions. Often a lot of our cultural monitors haven't even seen the consent conditions, so don't actually know what they're monitoring. Understand the archaeology process and practice. When is an archaeologist required? When are they required to be there? Because sometimes we're told to go home when actually, no, we're not meant to go home. We're actually meant to be right where we are. Understanding all the various acts and all the legal requirements, because again, if you know this strategically, timing-wise, we know where we need to be at the right time, at the right place. Health and safety is huge. As we talked about earlier, the massive development and infrastructure, and health and safety is at the very, very forefront. Part of our professionalism and our practice is that we need to understand health and safety. What's starting to happen, so my mahi that I work on the Takitimu North Lake, creating the new highway, is we have a compulsory drug and alcohol pre-employment test, including our cultural monitors. That's actually impacted hugely. Over 50% of our cultural monitors participating. That has then forced cultural monitors to monitor across the rohe, which has never ever happened before, because we just don't have enough cultural monitors. So we need to get our people understanding these things, which also kind of taps into wellness as well. There's some guidelines around kind of environmental effects and monitoring methods. When an ecologist comes, what does an ecologist do? When a bat specialist comes, what do they do? When you've got moko, what do they do? Again, using our works like the TNL, we've taken moko from their whenua to somewhere totally different. And it just kind of teaches us to think about things proactively. And does it mean that we need to be looking at creating our own sanctuaries, so that if we've got infrastructure happening in our rohe, that we can prepare when it's going to start in 5 to 10 years time, rather than we wait until we actually need somewhere, we have nowhere, they're not willing to wait, because that's what the infrastructure industry, it's all timelines and targets, and then our species are being shipped off to the Coromandel. And for us, species are kaitiaki, so why we want to shift these somewhere else is just not right. Communication, reporting and recording. Out of the research come timesheets was a huge one. We just need timesheets, and so it's real basic stuff, but often our people don't even know who to give their timesheet to. And a lot of this comes down also to the, I guess the entity that they're working for. It's not all hapu entities are actually equipped with administrators or accounts people, and so just kind of giving some guideline around that, just some basic templates. Reporting, one of the things we implemented on the TNL was that because you were going across your rohi is actually to record when you found taonga there, is actually to record so that you could actually give everything that you observed to that hapu. We had, a lot of things that aligned with pūrākau that people thought had been lost. So that was recorded. And then also too, another one that is part of recording is technology. People are moving away from pen and paper, and I know that some of the other kaupapa today was about ensuring that our sovereignty of our information. That's always a tricky space to get into, but there's something for towns to look at how they might start storing their information. What we notice is that with cultural monitors is that they're actually the observation people on the ground, and if that information isn't being stored, it just gets lost. The Takitimu North Link is the biggest archaeological site ever in the history of New Zealand. They've found the biggest Mahinga kai ever, and we're hearing a lot of me and my whanaunga over here, Chrissy, we hear all the time about it's the first time ever this has been found. This is the largest that's been found, but tangata whenua don't even know this, and cultural monitors don't understand the significance of this. So for us, it's really important that the upskilling, that there's some kind of framework that's available for the upskilling of our cultural monitors to ensure that we're, understanding the importance of our role as kaitiaki. And I think that's about it from me.
So to wrap that up, just if we could thank you, Nathan, for your support and your belief in us all the way through the process, not giving up on us, and being a good referee. But honestly, thank you so much for your help and for Kataraina's support as well. And what we would like to do moving forward is have another catch up with Nathan to see how we may broaden it or to make it more useful. But there you go, Bay of Plenty Regional Council. Put that up on your website. It's the first one of its kind. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies. I'm going to give Nathan is at the table, the opportunity to comment if he would like to, since you do refer to him. Would you like the opportunity to respond to the ladies? Their lovely acknowledgement of you.
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you very much, ladies. I think it's you've covered a lot, and there's also a lot coming towards us. And I think the really important thing to recognise here is the empowerment of this document to actually prepare us as a community to make sure that not only cultural monitors are on earthwork sites, but across the mana o te wai, Te Oranga Te Taiao, and for the Department of Conservation, Te Mana o Te Taiao. Those muka, those threads and themes will only have tangata whenua at that space monitoring those things, how they want that to be monitored. So again, this is a very good document to guide those things, and it's a very important document to start those conversations. So proud of you guys, and kia kaha.
Thank you, ladies, and I'd like to thank you for the mahi that you've put into a much needed document. Our theme song is around building capacity. Acknowledge you that the taonga is free. It's about sharing it, going out and amongst our whānau now and telling them here is something that can help you in the mahi you currently do. I know some are struggling out there of having to meet criteria when they're making applications. So here's the document you need to bring you up to speed to bring us, title you to apply for central government funding, local government funding. Once they've geared themselves up and ticking the boxes of your document, then they become more viable in their spaces in contention for that funding that's coming out, because it's not getting easier. and they certainly struggle in that space to meet the criteria, which I'm sure you've journeyed through yourself. So thank you very much for your fabulous work. I see some hands going up, so I'm gonna let the councillors ask you questions, and I'll start with Councillor White.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā korua ngā wahine toa mō tō kōrero kia mātou I tēnei rā. Hey, look, I just wanted to, I hear in your presentation very much a passion and a belief in what you've done, and also a relief, I sense, that this is across the line and presented to the council. So I want to thank you for that. I think anything to do with building the capability and capacity of our people out there when there are a number of tsunamis approaching us that actually do require a very serious cultural consideration is before us as a council. So I want to thank you for that. One of the things is in terms of the cultural monitoring, the araturuki, and having them on the ground, I mean, obviously a key issue here is how do I put this, is a level of mana that the position carries with it to create sort of influence out there and have people listening and have people responding and being able to draw on the support of your hapu, of your iwi out there as you progress is important. In your thinking, how would that connection work? I haven't got into the detail of your presentation, but how would that work in terms of sort of gaining that level of sense of authority? You can learn, you can train, but then getting that level of authority where you're recognised by all and sundry who you have to work through to create, an appropriate way forward. What are your thoughts in that particular space?
Thank you, Matua. That's a very important consideration when we talk about mana. We also have to, in the contemporary sense, speak of the word mandate. So not just anyone can be an araturuki, they have to be approved by their hapu. And within that within the training guide, there is a page that can be utilised by tangata whenua to ensure that araturuki are going through the right permissions processes. Otherwise, we can have all sundry out there wanting to do cultural monitoring and it not being organised. So, does that answer your question?
It does, and I would really love to see a number of pilots of this particular program out there. So testing it, getting it on the ground, and I'm assuming there are some out there already. What's your thoughts?
As I say, there is only, other than if you're taught by your kaumata, or you've been given some advice by perhaps a hapu lead cultural monitor, there isn't really anything out there. There's certainly nothing online. You can't read a book about how to exercise cultural monitoring or actually what the role is. So this was the gap that we identified as something that was needed to start that conversation.
No, it's great, because personally, even through my own Iwi Connects, I would love to see this program trialled. And I'm sure some of my colleagues out there would also feel the same way, to give it sort of on the ground substance, because I do really believe in this type of program, and giving the emphasis that it needs, because we need you out there. So, hey, congratulations anyway.
If I can get my juices really flowing with you, Matua, I'm really excited about the aspect of archaeologists are required under legislation. So why aren't cultural monitors? Let's have that national conversation.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, if I refer to one of the developments that's happening at the moment, the Rangiuru development that's under the purveyed of Quayside, one of our subsidiaries. I mean, the reality is they struck, some ancestral remains, and normally you would expect that relationship to be suddenly put on hold. Everything is on hold. But what happened is that Tapuika engaged with the archaeologists, and I don't know the qualifications of the archaeologists, but agreed a process where they would remove those remains, put it in a place appropriate that agreed with the tangata whenua, or the mana whenua, tangata whenua, and then at some future time reinter them in a place agreed. And those sorts of things are part of something that I've seen happen, but it would be really, really neat to exercise and recognise that process in a level of, I guess, integrity and consistency. Yeah, so I support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just tell Toko Titaru's comments and pass my congratulations on to Julie and Monique. This is really empowering and really good stuff to hear. All you're about is increasing the professionalism, the standing of the cultural monitors, and I applaud you for doing that. And as Titaru said, let's hope we can roll this model out across the region. Well,
Yeah, I support the concept, but I would also add that is particularly for consultation, for council to the wider community, that the model needs to empower all the feudalistics. I mean, hapu by. There's a common bond between all those hapu, and it goes back to our gods of nature. We all have common gods and they have common rules, and it's just to add that value into the mix, because that would make it easier for councils to consult with the wider community. If you have a common understanding between all the feudalistics, I call them, the hapu to hapu and so forth. Because if you ask any hapu whether they're Ngāpuhi or whether they come from Ngāti Parau, you say, do you believe in Tāpani Mātea? And they will say, yeah, this goes like this. They would have a common understanding of it. Or Haumai Tigiti or one of those gods, you've got a common understanding. And that common understanding should be conducive to all what I call the feudalistics. Just like that, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo the comments that have been made around the table. And I think it would also be recognised by those developers to the more professional approach. But I do have a query, and it may be sort of sidetracking a little bit around whose rohi you're on at a particular time when you go for a consent. We are instructed when we go for a war consent to consult, in my case, 3 iwi, and I've heard it now includes Ngāti Hinarangi. So can this be sorted out? Could not, why do we need 3 or 4 iwi replying? Surely from a practitioner's point of view, there can be some consolidation or reconciliation around these issues.
We all know that being Regional Council are risk averse, so they like to consult with all tangata whenua when they shouldn't be.
Thank you.
But it really comes down to who is mana whenua and why are others needing to comment. But around the, just the comments you made about developers, what we would like is to move this training guide on further with a narrative that allows others to understand equally what cultural monitoring is about, but in a less technical sense, because I think we get lost sometimes when we try and be clever with big words.
Thank you, Julie. I just wanted to ask this question as well. I think the reason why you're being asked to consult with iwi and that many iwi and that many hapu is the process of the regulator who are giving you the instructions to do so. I mean, a different perspective may come from mana whenua of the iwi of the rohe, but that gets challenged by central government time and time again. So that's why you've got to consult that many. It's not through the instruction of those that have mana whenua within the rohe. Kia ora.
Yeah.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you very much. Thank you for your excellent presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
Well done.
And I do have a pilot for you. All right, moving on with our agenda, everybody. We're now moving to the Chair's report. For the report, I'm going to hand to Kataraina, who's going to talk on our report.
I te tuatahi, tēnā korua wahine mā, mō kōrero. It was awesome to see the progress, Julie and Monique. Thank you so much. I knew it would happen because mana wahine, women get things done. It's awesome. Thank you.
Kataraina was like that. It's like, we don't give up. We don't do fail. There's no comment from Matua Mari.
Tēnā koe te rangatira, Maru. Tēnā hoki koutou katoa. So, in the Chair's report, which I'm happy to take as read and take any pārtai, we have some exciting presenters that are waiting on the Zoom. You will recall that Council has an environmental scholarship called He Tuka Tumuana, and I think Julie Shepherd was a recipient of that scholarship one year. That scholarship was established in the memory of the late Awanui Arangi Black. So it's a very special scholarship. It's open to anyone within the criteria, Māori and non-Māori alike. The students that we have on Zoom, and I'm hoping they'll just put their videos up. I think we've got everyone there except Rangi Pure, who has provided a video for the councillors. So if you are one of our recipients, can you just put your video on so the councillors can see you, please?
Aroha mai, Kat, before you go on, I can see Councillor Winter's hand is up. I'm not sure whether it's up from the previous or what you've just, oh, no, he just hasn't put his hand down. Haere tonu.
Just a question at the end, Mr. Chairman, of your Chair's report, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Winters. Yes, we'll take questions of the Chair's report. I just can see our students have been patiently waiting in the background for the opportunity to speak to our councillors. So we have Akuhata Bailey Winiata, Honey Verco, Daria Bell, Amy Natras, forgive me if I've pronounced that wrong, and Brooklyn Lee. And so we're really excited. The caliber of applicants for the scholarship was absolutely outstanding. It's so exciting to see our rangatahi and taiuhi just studying such amazing kaupapa and getting professional qualifications. It's brilliant. But we're going to start with our first recipient, and that is Akuhata. Kaya koe te rākau, Akuhata.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Kuna ngataha ko Tarawera o ku Mahinga, ko Te Roturu Nui a Kahu Matamoemoe, ko Tarawera o ku Roto, Te Aroa Te Waka, ko Te Aroa Te Iwi, no Rotura Ahau, ko Akuhata Bailey Winiata Tōku Ingoa. Kia ora everyone, my name is Akuhata. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Waikato based here in Tauranga. And my PhD looks at co-developing a framework to understand how Māori coastal communities can respond through a managed retreat lens away from a coastal hazard, specifically looking at managed retreat in response to sea level rise of climate change. So my PhD builds on my master's, which I completed halfway through of last year. That master's looked at understanding the state of play and the exposure of our coastal marae nationally to the impacts of sea level rise. So that data found that there are 191 marae that were within 1 kilometre of the coastline, and 41 of those marae are exposed to a 100-year extreme sea level event, and that increases with increase in sea level rise. My future aspirations, I'm still a fledgling in the academic sense, being still young in the PhD progress, but I would like to work more with Indigenous communities globally to understand how we can respond to the global impact of climate change. Climate change is happening all around the world, and especially to our Indigenous communities globally, they're the ones who are at most risk to the impacts of climate change. Specifically, the scholarship that the Bay of Plenty Regional Council provided has helped to enable me to commit myself fully to my studies. And given the cost of living and the rise of everything, that support has just been invaluable for me to pursue my endeavours for my education. So yeah, I just wanted to give a big thanks to the Regional Council for providing me this scholarship and supporting my future endeavours for my education. And I look forward to keeping this dialogue with the Council as I move forward with my research. That's all I have to say. I don't think that was 2 minutes, but kia ora.
Kia ora, Akuhata. Thank you for your kōrero. Just an amazing kaupapa and that journey that you're on. And it will be very useful for this council and many councils once you've completed it. And awesome. I'll just, the rākau now goes to Sunny. Kia ora, Sunny.
Tēnā mai tātou. Nā, e mihi atu ana kia tātou katoa kua whakakao mai. E whakarangatira ana I tēnei kaupapa whakahirahira, I mua I a tātou te rangi nei, no reira, kia ora mai tātou katoa. Pātai namatahi, ko ai au, ko Sunny Virko tōku ingoa, ka noho oku hononga matua ki te ihu me te kei o te waka o te arawa. Engari ko tūwhare toa noho ki tērā, ko te ati haunui a pāpārangi, ko Ngāti Kahunganu, me ngai tahua noho ki era, e tika ake pēr te whakahua no ngā tōpito katoa te motu. No reira mauri ora. Pātai nā marua, he aha aku mahi. Ka huri pēr ki te hoa haere o te reo Māori kia mara mai te katoa. So kia ora everybody. My name is Sunny Virko, and I'll just be sharing a brief overview of my study. So at the moment, I'm a first year PhD student at the University of Auckland, and that falls under the Faculty of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And so my project looks into the seismic assessment and design of Māori building structures. And although I acknowledge that the project is in its very early stages, we are still defining the scope and the filling parameters, but the contents between, I'm still interested in exploring a variety of things related to the structural response of our whare. And so this may look like material and typology, response and capacity, assessment algorithms, a bit of analytical modeling, and if I'm onto it enough, maybe even provisions and solutions for those marae that are most structurally prone. So a bit of a mouthful, but pātai namatoru, I want to keep this quick. How has the He Tokatu Moana Scholarship supported me in my studies? In short, it's alleviated the typical financial burdens that come with being a tauira. And so from my experience, you know, the less you have to worry about, the more on time, to quality and to standard your mahi will be. No reira, tēnei au ka mihi, I feel very honoured to speak today. No reira, kei aku rangatira, o tira te toinga o ngā kaiwhiwhi, tēnei anō au ka mihi. I would hate to cut into anybody's kōrero time, so I believe Daria, kei a koe pia te waingari, kei a koe kataraina.
Kia ora, Sunny. Phew, te arawa waka, rawe. Whiua te rākau kia koe, Daria. Thank you, kia ora.
Kia ora koutou katoa, kua hui hui mai nei tēnei rangi. Hiuri tēnei no te whanāpunui, Ngāti Tūwhare Ngāti Maniapoto me te arawa no hoki. I te paki au I te tai rāpiti, ro te rohe te whanāpunui. Kei konei a hau I naenei noho ana, kei rau pōkore, ko Daria Bautupingoa, he mihi nui tēnei ki a koutou, mō tō hoatutanga ki a hau I ngā pūtia, mō tōku tohu pairunga. He mihi anō ki a koutou ko kōrero I tēnei rā, he ka kāna te ngākau ki te ronga ki a koutou me o koutou mahi. Kauria hau I naenei ki te reo prawa. I'm completing my Masters of Science with the University of Waikato, and my thesis will be looking at developing a hapu-centric aquaculture business ecosystem. So we're creating a sustainable aquaculture system for Maori by Maori with the intention of re-establishing Pātiki to local hapu waterways, as well as income for whānau, so that they can continue to thrive on their whenua. Future aspirations, I have many, but to keep it short and sweet, my main driver is to be a better kaitiaki of our moana and taio, ia rā, hei painga mō ngā tamariki mokopuna. He mihi nui tēnei anō kia koutou, mō tō manaakitanga kia hau, nā reira, ka huri au, ki Amy Natras, I naenei, te rākau. Kia ora.
Kia ora, ko Amy tuku ingoa. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Regional Council for the support and the opportunity to continue to pursue my passion for environmental science. I've recently completed my Bachelor of Science with a major in environmental science and minor in geography at Massey University. And following on from that, I did a handful of environmental management papers, which kind of fueled me wanting to keep going. So I took up postgrad diploma in environmental management this year with papers in Maori resource management and contemporary environmental issues. I have a background in maritime, being involved with the Rotorua Lakes Coast Guard for a few years, and gained my skipper's restricted limits at the beginning of last year. The scholarship basically takes the stress away from study with all those excess fees cropping up all the time, and it helps me to develop my interest in environment and maritime, turn that into a career, particularly with a passion and freshwater quality for the Te Aroha Lakes, as that's where I've grown up and that's what I'm connected to. Once again, thank you for the support, and I'll pass it on to Brooklyn Leah. Kia ora.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Brooklyn and I'm currently doing a Master of Science majoring in Ecology and Biodiversity through the University of Waikato based here in Tauranga. My thesis proposal is still being finalised, but it aims to investigate the effects that different land uses have on headwater stream habitats here within the Bay Plenty region, with the scholarship providing me with much needed funds to help me achieve this goal, which I'm really grateful for receiving. Just wanted to pass my thanks on to everyone. And I hope that the successful completion of my thesis will pave the way to me becoming an ecologist or an environmental scientist in the future. Thank you.
Kia ora, nā tauira o toi moana. It's lovely to hear from you all. Such amazing intellect and amazing journeys that you're on. We do have a video from Rangi Pure, who is an apology and couldn't be here. So Shari's just going to put, it's a very short one. Shari's going to put that up, and then through you, Madam Chair, there might be some questions from the councillors to our successful recipients. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, o tira ngā mihi o te mātahi o te tauhou Māori kia koutou, ka kānapanapa mai ana ngā whetū, anō ko koutou te hunga mate, ko ngaro atu ki te pō, tēnei te hunga ora e mihi nei kia koutou, e tangi nei kia koutou, o tira e pupuru nei I o koutou taonga tuku iho, tēnā hui mai tātou. Kia ora koutou, ko Rangi Pure Manly tōku ingoa, he uri hau nō raukaua ki whare puhunga, no Ngāpuhi, no Ngāti Maniapoto, me Ngāti Whakauwe. Kia ora koutou, my name's Rangi Pure. I grew up in Rotorua. I study at Victoria University of Wellington, but I'm currently an extramural student living in the mighty Waikato in Hamilton. I study a conjoint degree of a Bachelor of Laws in Arts degree. I'm in my 5th year, and in my arts degree, my majors are Maori Studies and Maori Resource Management. And so naturally, this collection of experience and background has made me aspire to be environmentally driven, and especially in our Te Ao Māori side of things, to address better outcomes for Māori governance and management of our natural resources. My future aspirations are to establish a career in Māori environmental consultancy, and that's to do with the process of resource consenting and regional councils interacting, engaging with mana whenua and local iwi hapu and communities. And I just wanted to tuku a big mihi to all of you who are also recipients of this award. It's such a great time to be addressing a lot of these issues that our generation unfortunately have to address. And yeah, just proud to be from the Bay of Plenty and excited to see what's to come. I'm very grateful of this scholarship in financially supporting my ability to study. I recently finished a contract full-time work at Waikato Regional Council, and so having this extra financial aid is really good to just support my day-to-day expenses as well as my rent, along with contributing to paying off my student loan. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi nui rawa atu ki a koutou, te poari I whiriwhiri mai I a tātou, o I a mātou, ai, tēnā koutou.
Thank you, Shari. I'll pass it to you, Madam Chair, for the questions from the councillors. To our tauira, could you put your videos on again in case the councillors have some pātai for you? Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. I te tuatahi kei te mihi kia au ki a koutou, ngā tauira. I just want to make a little pledge to you all. Congratulations on receiving your scholarships. There's only one little catch that Kataraina did not, and you now become part of us for the rest of your journey and your journey in the future. So when we come calling, you will return. Ngā mihi. Now, Councillor Winters.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations to you all. Just clarify for me, Madam Chair, it's just 10,000 a year that we spread over the 6 recipients, is that correct? And I have a second question as well. Yeah, thank you. And just, we probably may need to look at that, Madam Chair, because I'm sure these students are well deserving of extra funds, having put 2 students through university ourselves. So I'm probably next year we may have to look at our LTP, Madam Chair, in terms of upping that rate.
Thank you, Councillor Winters.
Second question from me, Madam Chair, on page 23, the Rotorua Lakes Council municipal water take cultural flows. It talks about the key Rotorua municipal water takes. Is it all the springs in Rotorua, or is it just Taniwha Spring that Ngāti Rangiwewehi own and hold? Or can you? And so, for the minutes, can we list the springs that this cultural flow project is going to incorporate, rather than just you've got there the key municipal springs? Messagings.
Kia ora. Just in response to you before I pass to Kataraina to the second part, in relation to the pūtea that we have for the students, it's definitely on the cards for the next LTP. Well, it is going to Good self to be, ngā mihi. Kataraina, you still there? Can you respond to Councillor Winters' second part?
Kia ora, Councillor Winters. We can provide that information to you, but Ruben Gardner is part of this meeting and may be able to provide that detail now. If not, we can certainly get that to you. Thank you.
Kia ora, Madam Chair, Te Taru here. Can we continue with our students and get back to them? And ka nui te mihi ki a koutou ngā tauira o toi moana. It really is something that makes you wake up in the morning and have great hopes, particularly when you're carrying grey hair like this and you're referred to as a koeke. I look to the next generations and because what we do today as decision makers around the table is actually looking at a future that you are going to be front and centre. And so I really, really value the mahi, the studies that you're doing for all of you. And I wish you well. And I think it's a great thing that the Regional Council is supporting you. I totally support what Councillor Winters has said around looking again at our scholarships, because I believe that you've been great value, not just to us as a Regional Council, but to our country as well, and to your people, from wherever you're from. So I just want to congratulate you all. Your studies, doctorate, your masters, your postgraduate studies are just phenomenal, and in areas that some of us only dream about. But so you're the future, and I just want to congratulate you and comment. So ngā mihi anō, ngā mihi aroha ki a koutou e ngā tauira o toi moana. E te mihi atu. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Te Tau. Kataraina, we no longer have Ruben in the chamber, so we'll take on board what you've acknowledged to Councillor Winters, that you would get that list and circulate for us. Are you still there, Kataraina?
I'll definitely do that. That's already noted. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions, councillors? All right, that has brought us to the end of our meeting today. The Chair's report. Just for the Chair's report, can I have a move for the Chair's report, please? Councillor Easy, seconder, Councillor Thompson. No, that's not us. I'm not looking at Councillor Thompson, I'm looking at Councillor Thurston. Thank you. All those in favour, raise your right hand. You can see on their hands. Carried. Thank you. That definitely concludes our committee meeting. Thank you to all our presenters for making the time to present at the hui, and to members of the public who have been watching the live stream. I'm going to now pass to Councillor Iti to close our meeting.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. He mihi tēnei kia koutou katoa, he mihi o te tauhou Maori, he mihi o te matariki kia tātou katoa, ko ti tā tātou hui. Koe anō, mea noi. Kia whakairia te tapu, kia wā te ai te ara, kia turiki whakataha ai, kia turiki whakataha ai. Hami e, ui e, tā ki, kia ora tātou.
Kia ora tātou.